The other racing, I think, still some is due to inspection. So Kempton, Lingfield, Musselburgh, the inspection's probably taken place, but I don't know the result. The forecasts are cold in all three. Snow quite possible covering the sky in Musselburgh, Lingfield, Brighton, Kempton, as the odd shower, probably sleet. For those playing rugby, of course I know the weather never matters, but if you're watching, it's a cold one. It will be windy, of course, wherever you are, and the chances are there'll be a shower in the sky. Bristol getting away, likely with a rain rather than sleet or snow shower. For the footy today, Premier League, Man United, well, of course, the ground is going to be open to frequent snow showers here. That'll be an interesting one. Arsenal, not so, just the odd sleet one, I think, and Leicester about the same, but cold in all three, not surprisingly. We can run through quite a few football matches. You'll find the general picture is, if you're in the northwest of England, frequent snow showers, very cold, and if you're anywhere else, further south in particular, it's likely to be brighter, but still cold, and also it's still windy, and that is actually one of the things that will be most noticeable. That'll give a wind chill. If you want to go and watch these matches, be prepared. For the Challenge Cup, Warrington v St Helens, again, facing the northwest, where the wind is coming, 5 degrees, I'll put sleet on there. It could be snow. It'll be one or the other. It'll certainly be wintry, but head down to Twickenham, just as cold, hopefully rather fewer showers. Kick-off here is 3 p.m. By that time, the showers will still be coming through. The wind will also be stronger, because although the wind at the moment is strong in Scotland, the forecast takes the strongest winds down through Wales and central England today, and then tonight they die down. They turn round to Scotland and get that blue. When the computer brings you a blue wind like that, that's Arctic origin, very cold, so the wind chill just gets even worse. Nighttime temperatures will be very low. Now, if you're not interested in the sporting venues, the weather won't change, I'm afraid. It's still, generally speaking, cold, windy and showery. The concentrated snow drifting southwards will leave much of Highland Scotland and maybe even Musselburgh. Dry and sunny this afternoon, or a lot drier and sunnier, and then the winds strengthening through here will make it feel pretty awful. Very nasty afternoon for the North Midlands, for example. A little bit better if you're in southern England. The winds are still as strong. Temperatures of 7 to 9 look fine on the face of it. Just think of the wind chill. Yeah, let's think of the wind chill. There you are, another wind chill temperatures today. It'll feel like about -4 in Glasgow, -10 in the Highlands, but nowhere does it actually feel, if you're standing out in it, as though it's above freezing. So a very cold day. And not surprisingly, an exceedingly cold night. -10 possible in Scotland. A widespread hard frost. Even though the figures don't look that low, it'll be a hard frost. But the change tomorrow is quite apparent. We start to draw air up from the southwest again.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. It's now 8:30. You're watching Weekend 24, live from the studios of BBC News 24 with Bill Turnbull and Sean Williams. In a moment, we've got a summary of the main news this morning and still to come before 9 o'clock. Plans to help Britain's neglected parks and open spaces, will they bloom again? The stately homeowners who are unhappy to see details of their des res posted on the internet. And the rugby star Martin Offiah will be with us to tell us why sports stars across the country are raising money for children's charities. First, the main news this morning. The Israeli government says it won't attack Palestinian targets for 7 days unless it's provoked. It's also agreed to withdraw its army from positions seized recently in the Gaza Strip. The moves are part of a series of measures to reduce violence at the end of a week in which nearly 50 Palestinians and Israelis have died. Bedfordshire police say they will resist attempts to make them pay for damage caused by the fire earlier this month at the Yarl's Wood Immigration Centre. The centre is run by the security firm Group 4. Their insurers have written to the police saying they intend to make a claim under the 1886 Riot Damages Act. This allows companies and individuals to sue the police over damage caused during civil disturbances. The Labour leadership is bracing itself for a series of defeats at its Scottish conference over the Prime Minister's plans for big changes to public services. It comes despite a warning from Mr Blair that reform was necessary and unavoidable. Police in Northern Ireland have discovered a number of pipe bombs in 12 separate security alerts. The incidents happened yesterday in Mid-Ulster and County Londonderry. 2 police stations, 2 Gaelic football clubs and a pub were among the targets. The police have blamed the loyalist paramilitary group, the UVF, for the attacks. A couple with a child suffering from a potentially fatal genetic disorder have been given permission to use IVF to create another baby whose cells could cure him. Zain Hashmi will die without a transplant, but no suitable donor has been found. Doctors can now choose a compatible embryo with the hope that the baby could produce the right type of bone marrow for a successful transplant. And we'll be discussing that a little later in the programme. The TUC says 1 in 50 workers in the UK suffers from repetitive strain injury. It's lobbying employers to do more to stop it. But some members of the medical profession doubt the condition exists. Let's get a look at the papers now and join Bill.
Thank you very much. With us this morning, the journalist and writer Helen Taylor and Nelson David, who's editor of www.spinonthis.com, which is, as you might imagine, a rather irreverent look at news and current affairs. That's the best way to describe it. Good morning to you both. Thanks for coming in. Let's just have a quick whip through the front pages before we get to the news in detail. The Independent says there's a teaching crisis as vacancies double in the past year, and a picture of the bridge that no longer wobbles. The Daily Express, the last wish of John Thaw is that his wife, Sheila Hancock, should continue her career. Blue Murder, the police upset with David Blunkett's reforms, and Posh and Beck's having another baby, Kylie. Tragic news, we'll come to her in a minute. Designer Baby gets the go-ahead from The Guardian. Same story on the front page of The Telegraph with a colour picture of the Hashmi family, who are the people directly affected by that decision yesterday, and a story that no one else has, the SAS apparently joining the hunt for Osama bin Laden in Kashmir. Apparently he got away. Dawn of the maid-to-order baby in the Daily Mail, more on the Hashmi case, and a smiling Posh with her news about her new baby. Oops, and here's another one. Will they call it Essex? This is several of the papers having a go about the fact that Brooklyn was named after the place where either he was conceived or the parents discovered that he was on the way, and so there's lots of conjecture as to where this baby was discovered. Put it that way. And the Times, Pakistan urged to find the Pearl killers this after the murder of Daniel Pearl. Right, let's move on to your focus this morning. Nelson, you've chosen the Guardian editorial on Israel. And before you get to that, let me just tell you that just in the past couple of minutes, it's been revealed that a Palestinian man's been shot and killed by Israeli soldiers near the West Bank town of Hebron this morning. So Ariel Sharon was calling for 7 days of inactivity, so to speak, and that's come to an end pretty quickly.
Well, I think what's significant about this particular leader in The Guardian is that it's pretty outright, it's pretty upfront. It says Sharon must go, and there's been mutterings about Ariel Sharon for some time, and about the fact that he has not brought security as he promised he would bring security to the Israeli people, and in a sense. Even now in Israel, there is massive discontent with the way he's handled things. Even members of the Israeli army, there's a peace movement emerging, in the Israeli army, and you think, well, if that's happening, then things have gone very, very badly wrong. And yet, in some cases, it's hardly surprising, because Sharon is a soldier, and what we've seen in Israel is the bypassing of political solutions to problems and the use of military solutions. And in some senses, again, you can't blame the man, because thus far the USA have not lent on him. They have not said this is not the way to deal with it. And you might argue that in the war on terrorism, Bush is also using military solutions rather than political solutions.
All right, so the Guardian saying Sharon must go. Police officers would be saying that Blunkett must go, perhaps. Blunkett fury in the Daily Mail as police vote 10-1 against the reforms. They're not happy at all, are they?
Well, this is... in a sense, it's very good news for a man like myself. I'm an unashamed cheerleader for the anti-capitalist movement. And as you know, one of the points of the anti-capitalists is that we're living in a world which is slowly but surely being privatised. And here we now have the police who have voted 10-1 against David Blunkett's reforms. And of course, a lot of those reforms, reform has become a bit of a code word for privatisation. They say modernisation, they say privatisation.
St Martin's, they had their had a catwalk show yesterday, rounding off London Fashion Week. The important thing about London Fashion Week is it has been a great success after, obviously, it really sort of being a washout after the September 11th attacks last year. The important thing is that what has really been highlighted this week is how many of our big-name designers are actually showing in New York, Milan or Paris, and how few are sticking in London. And this has been a kind of cause of concern for the DTI and the British Fashion Council, and they're kind of coming together to try and analyse and see if we can stop the McQueens, the McCartneys from disappearing off.
Can you explain something to a fashion Luddite here, though? This doesn't end up on the clothes pegs of British home stores, does it?
No,
You know,
no,
so
of
what's the
course
point
not.
in producing it? Nobody's ever going to buy this, are they?
The British designer market is worth £700 million a year out of a 14 billion industry, so that's a sizable chunk. The thing is about these sort of things that you see in the papers is that they will get watered down. The Central St Martin's, these sort of designs are about creativity and showing our avant-garde drive and kind of fashion sense and style.
And also generating publicity, presumably,
exactly.
for the industry.
I mean, you want this in the papers. You
No, you
don't want
don't.
someone in a
I would not,
boring
no.
suit, but it is a real problem. The fashion industry does need more money injected into it so that our young designers and the talents that we nurture and we put through university and design schools
All right,
stay.
we'll add fashion to the list of all the other things that need lots of money. Okay, Helen Taylor, Nelson David, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Sharp.
You're watching Weekend 24 from the studios of BBC News 24. Let's have a look at the headlines now. It's 8:45. Israel says it won't attack Palestinian targets for a week unless it's provoked. Police in Bedfordshire say they'll fight any claim for damages after the Yarl's Wood disturbances. And a new campaign to cut RSI. Unions say it's costing us £500 million a year. Now, the state of Britain's parks and public spaces is being investigated by the Treasury. MPs say the government should stop developing new landscaped areas and concentrate instead on improving the ones that have been neglected for years.
It's been christened the People's Park, a haven of green in the heart of the East End of London. A place that was little better than wasteland 5 years ago, now helping improve the quality of people's lives here.
You see a lot more people now coming into it and walking through the park with the dogs and such for, and it's a much brighter place. It's lovely. You feel as if you're somewhere else. You're not, in the middle of London,
So it's created a nice sort of family feel, and I think this is exactly what this area needs.
Its most striking feature, a grassy bridge spanning the Mile End Road. This park shows what can be done when there's the money and the will.
People felt they wanted to see wildlife, softer landscape, countryside sort of style of tree planting, and all of that is reflected in the parks. It's been very responsive to a plan and a discussion that was had about 5 years ago with the community.
But Mile End Park is very much the exception rather than the rule. A recent survey showed that 40% of parks in this country are in decline. And the kind of things they have here, like fountains and paddling pools and toilets, are increasingly rare.
Jubilee Gardens by the London Eye is more typical, several bare acres of wasted opportunity. Britain's parks were in their heyday in the 50s and 60s. When local councils were given responsibility for them in the mid-70s, the neglect began. Now it's estimated that £1.3 billion a year is needed just to catch up with lost investment. At their best, urban spaces can make a real difference to people's lives, and there's growing pressure for change in a number of ways.
More resources, more real money to restore some of that £1.3 billion that's been lost to our public parks since 1979. More powers so our local authorities can look after them properly, and more community ownership so that people living in an area have a real stake in looking after their parks and public spaces.
Government proposals on the future of our parks are expected in the next few weeks. The question is how far they'll go in helping to halt the decline. Jane Hughes, BBC News in the East End of London.
Let's get some more now on that decision to allow a family from Leeds to use IVF to try to conceive a baby to help their seriously ill son. The Hashmi family hope that bone marrow from the new baby will help their son Zayn. He has a rare and potentially fatal blood disorder. Well, what are the implications of the judgment from the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority? Joining us to discuss it now are Peter Garrett, the Director of Research from Life, and Dr. Ronan Gillen, who's Professor of Medical Ethics at Imperial College London. Thank you very much for coming in this morning, gentlemen. Peter Garrett, if I can start with you. The Hashmis want to have a baby that doesn't have a potentially fatal blood disease and can help their son Zayn. Is that fair?
I'm very touched by the story, and I can understand why the parents are doing what they're doing. I think that this technology is a step too far, because in order to provide this treatment, they are in fact deselecting, getting rid of a large number of embryos which they've judged not to be the right type.
Which you do in IVF anyway, don't you?
IVF is a very wasteful and profligate technology. About 95%, 19 out of every 20 embryos created are destroyed. I mean, if I was in their situation, I would do almost anything to safeguard the right to life of one of my children. But the word almost is very precious to me, and I wouldn't create smaller children so that they could give their body parts for treatment.
Dr. Gillen, I suppose it also depends on where you say life starts from as well, and you get into all sorts of very difficult ethical dilemmas there. But do you think what the Hashemis are trying to do is ethically wrong?
I do, but then I don't agree that an embryo is a person and that killing it or deselecting it is murder, and that's a crucial issue here. But if we put that aside, and lots of people don't believe that embryos are people who can be murdered, but are pre-people, they're long before we become a person, then I think what we're doing here, what they're doing here, is selecting one embryo rather than another, because the child that embryo will become will be helpful to their existing child.
But then I suppose there is a danger, or some will see this, as that you're creating a baby as a means to an end, that the only reason you're having that baby is to help another child, rather than the baby in itself, just to love another child and to add it to your family.
You know, this Kantian notion of a means to an end is a very important one, but it's crucial to remember that what Immanuel Kant said was never use people merely as a means to an end. And there's no reason to suppose that these parents are going to be using this child merely as a means to an end. They're going to love the child, I assume, why not? But they're also going to be able to use his cord blood, and that's very important.
I'm very concerned about that because I think that with natural procreation, you've got equality between parents and child. I mean, traditionally, parents accept a child regardless of perfection or imperfection. When you go to these types of situations, it seems to me that the relationship is no longer one of equals. It's a bit like an architect and a building. The parents are choosing the specifications of the child and ordering the child into being. And once you do that, you are in the position that's dominant and the child is in the position that's submissive. And I'm very concerned about what that's doing to the nature of family.
So in other words, child as commodity?
It's not quite as strong as child as commodity, but it's designer baby and it's damaging the structure of relationships within families.
Dr. Gillen?
No, I see it much more as looking for particular characteristics. For example, suppose you could see in an embryo one that has a very nasty disease in its genes and one that hasn't. Then selecting the one that hasn't seems to me a perfectly reasonable, morally acceptable thing to do, provided you don't think that the other one is being murdered, as it were.
Dr. Gillen says, you know, it's definitely not a person. The fact is, we don't really know the moral status, and if there's a doubt, we should give the right to life and the benefit of the doubt to the baby.
A cyclical argument. We come right back to the beginning, because, of course, you both disagree on where life starts. I'm afraid we've got to leave it there.
Encyclical argument.
OK, Dr. Ronan Gillen and Peter Garrett, thank you very much for coming. Back to you, Phil.
An attempt to photograph all the listed buildings and monuments in England hasn't gone down too well with some of their owners. The photos are being posted on the internet as a permanent record by English Heritage, but some owners of historic homes are worried it could merely be an invitation to burglars.
Bob Manickshaw has a mission. He's part of a volunteer army. Armed with camera and tripod, he's hunting landmarks. With hundreds of other amateur photographers, he's creating a photographic record of all England's officially listed heritage.
So it's been a wide variety of things, and some have been really surprising, actually. It's amazing what they list. One of my colleagues had 42 lampposts that he had to actually photograph individually. So I was glad I didn't get that one.
Bob's taken 500 photos so far. There are 370,000 monuments and buildings to be captured on camera.
It's not just grand buildings like churches and stately homes which are listed. This Cabby shelter, which dates back to 1897, will also have its photograph put on the internet next to that of national monuments. The idea is to give everybody access to part of our history.
But not everyone wants to take part. Bill Tucker's writing to English Heritage to complain. His home was built in 1840. He's proud that it's a Grade 2 listed building, but angry that no one's asked him about putting its details on the web.
The whole idea of putting photographs and descriptions of people's houses to be advertised to the public at large was impertinent, intrusive, and we surely have some rights of privacy. And we had never been consulted as to whether this would happen or not.
A lot of information on the website is already publicly available, but it's these photographs of their homes which are bothering owners. To meet their concerns, they could be given the right to keep those photos off the web for the next 10 years. At English Heritage, they hope offering that 10-year delay will help. It will give homeowners time to get used to the idea of the photos being on a website rather than in a library.
A lot of it is perception so far as the internet is concerned. There is already a huge amount of information out there, and I don't think a single image taken from the road, along with a technical description, is really going to make a lot of difference to that.
Some of England's historic homes are already familiar to the public. Many are open to visitors or used as backdrops for film and television dramas. But security is a constant preoccupation, and not everyone's convinced the safeguards on the website will be enough.
At the moment, there is some form of a restricted access for people that have to register their address and where they're coming from. But in our view, there is plenty of scope for false addresses. And obviously, you're concerned about burglars and burglars identifying houses that might be worth burgling.
But the website has plenty of supporters, not least Bob and the other volunteers. He'll be crisscrossing the country for months to come, slowly adding more photos to the website. It could take years to complete the project. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
First we had Live Aid, when pop stars got together to raise money for good causes, all of 16 years ago, longer, 18 years ago. Then came Comic Relief, when comedians decided to do their bit. Now the country's sportsmen and women are joining in for Sport Relief. It all comes to a climax on the 13th of July, but there are plenty of chances to raise cash for good causes before then. Rugby is leading the way with something called Pay to Play Day. Here to tell us about it is the rugby legend, Martin Offiah is the proper way to pronounce it, although we've always called you Martin Offiah.
I know, when I say Offiah, no one knows who I'm talking about.
It's the streaks of flame from your shoes when you're racing down the pitch, probably.
Something
Anyway,
like that.
Thanks for joining us this morning. What's it all about then, Martin?
Pay to Play is happening on the 16th and 17th of March, that weekend. And it's basically, we're encouraging everyone involved in rugby at all levels, all codes, to get involved and basically pay to play that weekend. Whether you're a professional like myself, a lot of professional players will be donating their wages for that day, so they'll be harking back to the old amateur days and playing for free and donating all this money to help children.
So when you'll be playing for Wasps that weekend?
Yeah, I'll be playing for Wasps up against my old mate Jason Robertson up at Sale Sharks, and so I'll be marking him for free.
Good. But you also want, presumably, spectators to join in as well?
Yeah, as I said, it's something that all codes, all levels, whether you're a spectator, you know, a player, even if you're an amateur, you can donate your subs, you can donate a certain amount of money per points. Spectators can have whip rounds, you know, can do raffles. There's lots of ways of getting involved. We're even asking the referees to donate the coin they toss up before the match. So we're looking to the whole rugby union community, also rugby league, as I say, spectators, everyone to get involved and make this a success.
There's a phone number that people can ring, isn't there, to get, there's an information pack?
Yeah, there's an information pack. The number, if I remember off my head, is 09068 22 22 22.
You're absolutely right.
Costs only £1, and that involves the posting and packaging. You'll get an information pack, and if you think you've got better ways of raising money for this great cause, then you should ring in and let the fundraisers know.
And the money is going towards what? The same sort of target as Comic Relief?
The money's going to be split 50-50. 50% of the money is going to go towards UK-based organisations, things like Women's Aid, Centrepoint, and other organisations that try and you know, heal individuals. A lot of children have been the victim of a lot of violence, and also in violent communities such as in Bradford, trying to bring communities together, also in Northern Ireland, and basically trying to use sport to heal, but also providing you know, basic needs for children like health, shelter, education.
It shouldn't take too much. After all, after a game, 1 pint less, you can put it in the pot instead of...
Yeah, very much so. It's also going to help children all around the world. The International Labour Organisation helping, you know, children who end up working at very young ages in domestic service and things like that.
Wish you all the best with that, Martin Offiah. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. And if you want to get involved with Pay to Play Rugby, you can call for a fact sheet. The number 09068 222222. Calls will cost no more than £1, and the money covers printing, postage and package.
More about Sport Relief also by going to a website at www.sportrelief.com. That's all from us for this morning.
It is. We're back BBC One tomorrow, 6 o'clock. See you then.
Bye-bye.
A Palestinian man is shot dead as Israel attempts to break the cycle of violence. Police in Bedfordshire say they'll fight any claim for damages after the Yarswood fire. The curse of the computer age. Unions say RSI is costing us £500 million a year. And in sport, England are on top as they look to square the one-day series with New Zealand. Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. This is BBC News 24. I'm Stephanie Callister. A Palestinian man has been shot dead in the West Bank by Israeli soldiers. It comes as the Israeli government had agreed not to attack Palestinian targets for 7 days, following talks between security officials on both sides. About 50 people have been killed in the past week.
There have been several signs of efforts to try to reverse the spiralling Israeli-Palestinian violence of recent days. Two-side security officials met on Thursday night for the first time in weeks. According to the Israelis, they agreed to a number of steps to calm tensions. The Israeli army has pulled back from positions it seized recently in the Gaza Strip. And earlier, the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat had renewed his call for a ceasefire. The Palestinians also said they'd rounded up 3 suspects in the killing last October of an Israeli cabinet minister. Now, according to Israeli government sources, Israel has agreed to a Palestinian request not to initiate military action for 7 days. The sources insist this is a tentative agreement and not a ceasefire, and is to give the Palestinians a chance to control security on their side. And, they say, Israel reserves the right to respond to threats to its security. This could be an important step in de-escalation, but the situation remains fragile. Nick Childs, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's go over now to our correspondent, Nick Childs, who's in Jerusalem. Good morning to you. Can you tell us a bit more about this latest incident?
Well, the Palestinians say that it was a 22-year-old student who was shot dead by Israeli soldiers. The Israeli army's statement is that an army outpost, an isolated outpost, it says, near the West Bank town of Hebron, spotted a young man approaching the outpost shouting, "Allahu Akbar, God is great." They said that the soldiers opened fire when the man reached the fence of the outpost and shot him dead. And the Israeli army version is very much that he was in an area where civilians are not normally found, and as far as they were concerned, the Israeli army carried out protocols as they were expected to, although they're also saying that he wasn't armed.
So the 7-day agreement, where does that leave it?
Well, clearly what this latest incident shows is that it remains a very tense and fragile situation on the ground, and that the various steps which seem to be underway as far as trying to rein in what's been the bloodiest phase of violence in this 17-month confrontation between the Israelis and the Palestinians are just that. They're very tentative, and clearly it is going to be difficult to rein in the violence. As far as what we've heard from Israeli sources is that they say that there is this understanding not to initiate military action, but they're also saying that they reserve the right to protect their own security.
Yasser Arafat, of course, during the week had promised a ceasefire. How hard is he going to find it to deliver that?
The company which runs the now partly destroyed Yarl's Wood Asylum Centre is invoking a 120-year-old act in its attempts to redirect its £42 million insurance claim onto the Bedfordshire Police. Legal experts working on behalf of the company say the responsibility for the riot and the subsequent fire is with the police, not Group 4. The writ has left Bedfordshire Police seething. A spokeswoman for the authority said, "We find it quite outrageous and will resist it vigorously." Group 4 have already been criticised by the police and the fire services for the hour-long delay in handing over control of the site whilst detainees ran riot and the fire spread out of control. The question of why sprinklers weren't installed continues to cloud the issue, with the local fire service claiming that these would have limited the fire to a more manageable area. With 25 detainees still missing, heavy lifting equipment has been brought in onto the site later today to help begin sifting through the demolished building for clues to the blaze. Matt Gardner, BBC News.
Police in Northern Ireland have discovered a number of pipe bombs in 12 separate security alerts. The incidents happened yesterday in Mid-Ulster and County Londonderry. 2 police stations, 2 Gaelic football clubs and a pub were among the targets. The police have blamed the loyalist paramilitary group, the UVF, for the attacks. The Labour leadership is bracing itself for a series of defeats at its Scottish conference over the Prime Minister's plans for big changes to the public services. This comes despite a warning from Mr Blair that reform was necessary and unavoidable.
Union leaders in Scotland remain deeply sceptical about the government's plans for a greater role for the private sector in schools, hospitals and local authorities. And all the signs are that in a number of key votes today, they're set to inflict a series of embarrassing defeats on the party leadership. This despite Mr Blair's words of reassurance yesterday when he stressed that public sector workers had nothing to fear from reform. While possible defeat at the hands of the unions will be seized upon with glee by Labour's political opponents, they're unlikely to sway Mr Blair from his determination to press ahead with reform. And privately, some within government may even welcome an opportunity to face down their union critics. Norman Smith, BBC News, Perth.
This is BBC News 24. Coming up, how much influence did Enron have over President Bush's energy policy? The US Congress prepares to take the White House to court to find out. Pakistani police are today reportedly searching for 4 new suspects involved in the murder of kidnapped journalist Daniel Pearl. America has been pressing President Musharraf of Pakistan to deliver on his promise to find the killers of Mr. Pearl, whose body has yet to be found. The United States has imposed sanctions against the Zimbabwean government in response to political violence in the run-up to presidential elections next month. The sanctions ban President Robert Mugabe and senior members of his government from entering the United States. The ban will also include business leaders who are seen to be benefiting from the policies of the Zimbabwean government. The government in Angola says the rebel leader Jonas Savimbi has been killed in fighting. Savimbi had spent several decades leading his UNITA opposition troops in one of Africa's longest-running civil wars. UNITA has denied the reports, but the Angolan government says it will prove them by putting his body on public display. The US Congress is going to court to try to force the White House to release details of meetings between the Vice President, Dick Cheney, and executives of the collapsed energy company Enron. The action is part of an investigation into how much influence Enron had on President Bush's energy policy.
The US Vice President Dick Cheney, the man now at the center of an unprecedented dispute in American politics. He's being sued in a federal court. The case brought to force him to reveal exactly who he met while drawing up the Bush administration's new energy policy. The suit has been filed by Congress's investigative arm, the General Accounting Office. Its job to scrutinize the way government money is spent. This is the first time it has ever taken the White House to court to force it to reveal information.
You have an administration thumping its chest saying, we're going to protect the right of secrecy and we're going to protect our prerogatives, and then Congress saying, no, we're going to protect our right to investigate.
The case threatens to tangle the Bush presidency in the ballooning scandal surrounding Enron. When the energy giant collapsed in December, it was the biggest corporate failure in US history. Enron, together with its bosses, was the largest donor of money to George Bush and the Republican Party. Democrats want to discover if energy policies were made to benefit the White House's political friends. In a separate series of investigations, Congress is examining why one of America's top companies went so spectacularly bankrupt. The White House says who it meets when it's deciding its policies should remain confidential, but by defending that principle, it risks looking like it's trying to hide the extent of its dealings with Enron and the energy industry.
There's been a gradual erosion of power away from the presidency over to the legislative branch, and I think the president and the vice president believe it's very important that they leave the people's house in better shape when they leave than when they came into office.
President Bush arrived back in Washington from the Far East on Friday evening. His White House is talking tough, saying there's no room for compromise and Congress is prying too deep. But that has echoes of a previous president's efforts to stave off investigations, Nixon and the whiff of Watergate. The Bush White House insists it's blameless, but it's facing the prospect of a long, drawn-out battle. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Washington.
More than 30 babies could be tested for tuberculosis after a pregnant woman who'd been on the maternity ward at the time of their births was found to have the disease. The news affects more than 30 mothers whose babies were delivered at the Royal Hallamshire Hospital in Sheffield last November. The Trust said the patient concerned had not displayed any symptoms of TB while she was on the ward. A couple with a child suffering from a potentially fatal genetic disorder have been given permission to use IVF to create another baby whose cells could cure him. Zain Hashmi will die without a transplant, but no suitable donor has been found. Doctors can now choose a compatible embryo with the hope that the baby could produce the right type of bone marrow for a successful transplant. The first time this technique was used was by an American couple in Colorado to help save their daughter. Lisa and Jack Nash used IVF and cell selection to have a boy. Earlier, Lisa Nash told the BBC that she didn't hesitate to have another child.
The ethical concerns that we had were if we would have gone and had Adam just the natural way of having a baby, would it have been ethical to go ahead knowingly and have another child to have the disease that Molly had and to suffer the way that Molly had been suffering and possibly die like Molly may have been. So we had no ethical problems at all doing this to ensure that Adam would be healthy.
Rail services at York Station could be disrupted until tomorrow after part of the roof fell onto power lines during high winds. The East Coast route was temporarily suspended after the incident and buses were brought in to replace train services. The TUC says 1 worker in 50 in the UK suffers from repetitive strain injury. It's lobbying employers to do more to stop it, but some members of the medical profession doubt the condition exists.
Richard Willis Owen has been programming computers for 8 years. He's had 2 of the last 3 weeks off because of shooting pains in his arms, and he's in no doubt it's job-related.
I'm an application developer, so I use a computer all day. I'd say in an average 7-hour day, probably well over 6 hours is spent with my hands on the keyboard and on the mouse. The symptoms I'm feeling now is pain in my forearms, pain in my wrists, and basically it hurts to do what I'm meant to do for my job.
A new generation of patients is queuing up as well. There's a growing concern that the technology which drives PlayStations aggravates RSI.
There's evidence that a number of children are becoming affected now, whether it be with text messaging on the mobile phone, with computer games, dissertations at university, under pressure. We're in danger of breeding a nation of cripples.
The TUC claims that 5.5 million workdays were lost last year because of RSI. But some in the medical profession take issue with such a high figure. Many say it's not even a real injury.
But there are 2 groups of people who will tend to think they've got a physical illness like RSI when they complain of aching in the muscles. These are people that are concerned about their physical health and believe if they have certain symptoms that they have a serious illness. And there's another group, and those are people who do not like their work, who don't get job satisfaction, and in particular those people who feel they have no control over their work practices.
The medical profession also says it's not caused by repetition, so much as persistent tension in muscles for a prolonged period of time. The fight between doctors and patients over the validity of RSI is nothing compared to the battle royale between employers and sufferers. 2,000 workers received over £10,000 in compensation each last year. The game is far from over. Virginia Eastman, BBC News.
Now the headlines at 9:15. A Palestinian man has been shot dead by Israeli soldiers. The shooting came despite an Israeli pledge to try to reduce the cycle of violence. Police in Bedfordshire say they'll fight any claim for damages after the Yarswood disturbances. And a new campaign to cut RSI. Unions say it's costing us £500 million a year. This is BBC News 24. Still to come, why some stately homeowners don't want details of their des reses posted on the internet. Now the sport with Dominic Cotton.
Thanks very much indeed. Good morning to you. Well, England's cricketers have levelled their one-day series in New Zealand. Rain interrupted their innings, but in the end they set their hosts 223 in a game shortened to 40 overs a side. After a poor start, Chris Cairns kept New Zealand in the game, but in the end they fell 34 runs short. Pat Murphy was watching in Auckland.
Andrew Flintoff wrapped up the game by bowling Daryl Tuffy. Flintoff's 4th wicket innings
New Zealand all out 189. England win on the faster scoring rate. The revised target under Duckworth-Lewis, because of various rain interruptions, was 223 in 40 overs. At one stage, when Cairns was going so well, 58, including 2 huge sixes, there was just the ghost of the chance that the New Zealanders would win this. But Collingwood got him out. Cairns slogging. Harris had gone just before that to White for 23. Assel magnificently caught by Gough at third man of Flintoff for 23. So England have wrapped this game up, and now at 2-2, the series is all to play for in Dunedin on Tuesday.
Now on to football, and there's a full programme in the English Premiership today. Arsenal face Fulham, while on Merseyside it's Derby Day. Liverpool will be without the injured Steven Gerrard for the visit of Everton. Plenty of action too at the bottom of the table. Leicester entertain Derby, while West Ham play Middlesbrough.
Steve McLaren's Middlesbrough will be hoping to follow up last Tuesday's win over Fulham with victory at West Ham. The Londoners will be without suspended trio Paolo Di Canio, Sebastian Schemmel and Trevor Sinclair in a match McLaren believes is a milestone for his side.
We're still only 6 points away from the bottom 3, yet we're only 5 points away from going into the top 8. So I believe we're at a crossroads, and I'll be interested to see the next 3 or 4 games, exactly what the players achieve and where we can go.
Paul Dickoff should debut for bottom club Leicester as they play second from bottom Derby in a relegation 6-pointer. The Rams boss John Gregory is confident his men can avoid the drop.
We need a little bit of luck if we got it against Tottenham with the goal. We're a little bit fortunate in that respect. We didn't get too much against Sunderland, but if I get the same kind of performances that we've had in those 2 games for the remainder of the season, then I wouldn't put anything beyond this squad of players.
While Southampton manager Gordon Strachan still has a striker shortage, going into Bolton's visit to St Mary's, James Beattie and Brett Ormerod are both doubtful with injuries. Mike Bushell, BBC News.
Now it's the 5th round of the Tennis Scottish Cup in Scotland this weekend. There'll be an inspection ahead of the game between Partick Thistle and Inverness Caledonian Thistle. This season's giant killers Ayr United are hoping to reach a 2nd cup final. Meanwhile, they travel to Premier League Dundee United. Now to the Winter Olympics, and after the success of Great Britain's curlers, there's hope of another medal today. Alan Baxter, who competes in the slalom, has already caused a stir in Salt Lake City by dyeing the Scottish flag into his hair. Well, he may not be the favourite, but he does have an outside chance of getting on to the podium.
En route to training, Alan Baxter is the best skier Britain's produced in 2 decades. He spends at least 7 months a year on the slopes. In many ways, the Olympics have come 12 months too late for him. He finished 11th in the World Cup standings last year, but has struggled to find his form lately. The proud Scot has also had to dye his hair during the Games and remove the white cross he put in. It broke the rules of the International Olympic Committee.
You know, I'm from Scotland, my nickname's a Highlander. Why not? A bit of crack. But then I was advised to sort of take the colour out, just because of, you know, we race for Team GB, and, you know, it's fair enough, I don't want to cause any trouble.